Another 30 seconds and then we'll get started.
Okay, I just hit record, so we're recording from here on out.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. You could put the presentation up for me. All right, thank you. So welcome to the King William Zoning Ordinance Virtual Forum. Just want to thank everyone for getting on tonight and participating. For those that don't know me, I'm Rebecca Cobb, a planner with the Berkeley Group. We also have some other Berkeley Group staff joining me tonight. Kelly Davis as well as Steph Mathena are both on the call. They may chime in at some point, or especially when we get to the end, we're going to have some question and answer time. And so you may hear them at that point. A couple of housekeeping items. You are on mute. And so we would say if you've got any questions or if you're having trouble hearing or any comments or anything like that, just use your chat. If you go down towards the bottom of your screen and kind of hover around down at the bottom in the middle, there is a button that says chat. You can click on that and it's going to open a little window to the right where you can type in your question or your comment there. And so feel free as your questions come to mind, put those in and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. Next slide. And so this is a public forum to discuss the zoning and subdivision ordinance update. And we began this back in January. Unfortunately, during that event, we had to shut down and close for some bad behavior. So hopefully everything will go smoothly tonight and we'll get through the entire presentation. It is the same presentation. So I'm sorry if you're having to tune in the second time to this. But it's all the same information and we'll just be able to do some question and answer at the end. It's also a recorded version of this has been supplied on the county website. So if you've seen that, or if you're interested in listening to this again to absorb some more information, you can go to the county website for that. And next slide. So for tonight, we do have a couple of polls, and the first poll I'd like to share with you all and ask you all if you're familiar with the zoning ordinance and what's in it. And so we can get that poll up. So you can just click on your answer and submit it if you're familiar with the zoning ordinance, yes, no, or maybe you're somewhat familiar. You know, maybe this is your first time. You got a flyer in the mail and you decided to join last month and have come back. And so this is new to you, or maybe you're very familiar. So just put your answers in. And once we've got pretty good participation, we will close the poll. So just a couple more seconds to put your answers in. All right, Travis, do we have good participation on this poll?
We have 15 of 23 that have voted. You want me to share those results?
Yes, let's see the results. So we've got 47% tonight say they are, yes, they're familiar. There's about 20% that says no, and 33% saying some. So we'll close that poll. Thank you for participating in that. And not to worry if you are new to this or only know a little bit, because we will start out with a little introduction about what a zoning ordinance is, what's in it, that type of thing. Then we're going to move into the process to date, what has happened thus far in updating the zoning ordinance. We'll talk about the schedule and how we're going to proceed through the next portions of this. And then I'm going to go through reviewing some of those changes that are proposed. And then we'll have just sort of a recap on next steps. And then after that, we will do some question and answer time. Again, just a reminder, if you've got questions, please put them in the chat because your microphones are muted. And next slide. So what is zoning? Zoning defines how land in the county can be used and developed. Zoning is allowed by Virginia State Code, and some elements must match the state code exactly, and others are defined by the county. So in some cases, the state says, you know, this is exactly how you have to do this. You have so many days to do this. And then in other cases, there's more leeway where the county can decide how strict to be or how relaxed to be with some regulations. So zoning ordinances typically regulate things like the dimension of lots, or they might have, you know, your minimum lot size that you can have. There's regulations on the height of buildings, the distance between buildings, the location of uses. So say, you know, you own industrial use, the county ordinance can dictate where that can locate. So it's typically in industrial zoned property versus more in a residential zoned area. Parking, landscaping, signs, those are all also things that the county can regulate. Next slide. And so the county is broken into zoning districts, and this map is a map of your county with the zoning districts displayed. And you'll notice that most of the county is white. And so that means that's the AC, or Agricultural Conservation Zoning District. So if you've got land that's, you know, in this map under the white coloring, then that means you are within the AC zoning district. And so all of the regulations for the AC district would apply to your piece of property. You'll also notice on this map, there are some blue and some yellow parcels. Those are parcels that are residentially zoned, and then there are red parcels for business zoned property. Green is industrial, and then there's white with a blue outline, which is historic preservation. And so if you're wanting to explore this map a little bit more, we do have a link on this page for you to do that. You can go to the county website and participate in their interactive GIS map. You could also call the county if you're still uncertain about what your zoning is, and the planning department can help you determine what your property is zoned. One thing I do want to mention too about this map is we are not proposing any changes to this. So whatever the property is zoned currently, that's what will continue through this process. We're not proposing any changes for this map. Next slide. And so why do a zoning and subdivision ordinance, you know, even need updating? And predominantly that's because of change. The main driving force is the community, what the community visions in terms of appearance of their community, what businesses they want to allow, where the community deems is appropriate for specific businesses or for locations for subdivisions. And these things are shifting over time. And so zoning ordinances and subdivision ordinances need to be written in a way that achieves the goals and the vision for the community. And so we've got another poll question related to this. If we can get that up, it's what is your top priority regarding zoning and land use for the community? And we've got some choices here: encouraging industrial growth, encouraging new commercial like retail or restaurant, encouraging new housing development, preserving the rural character of the county, preserving agriculture, preserving and conserving sensitive environmental areas, protecting existing residential balancing new development and community character, or maybe you have some other thought that you're thinking of, or maybe you don't have an opinion. This is also a survey question, and tonight we're just asking, we're being really difficult tonight and making you narrow it down just to one selection. On the survey, you can select 3 options, because we do realize, that sometimes, things are a tie and you want more than one thing. But so for tonight, we are trying to narrow it down and see what this group thinks is top priority. So cast your votes, give it a moment of consideration. And how are we doing on voting, Travis?
There's a few, they're coming in now. We're at 9 of 24, now at 10. I'll also take this time for those people that have called in on a phone. Later on, when there's time to ask questions, please hit *9 on your phone, and that will raise your hand, and which will allow me to unmute you to speak. Those are for people that have called in. That's 50% have voted.
Okay, let's give it just a couple more seconds. Anyone who's still deciding, punch in your answer.
Ed Moran just said
All right, let's go ahead and close polling and see what the group that voted thinks. So it looks like the largest group here is at 50% of the folks said preserving the rural character of the county. And that's a pretty big margin there. The next are 14%, chose a few other things like encouraging new commercial, preserving ag, balancing new development and community character. So thank you for participating on that. We can go ahead and close. And so in addition to, the community's vision, there are also new uses, things like food trucks, that's something that, communities really are seeing a lot of, but it's something new, as well as Airbnbs. And so, as new businesses come about, you want the community to be able to allow those things. You want to be business friendly. You want to, have that boost to your economy. But if it's not listed in your ordinance, then it's not a use that is allowed. And so for those new uses, you want to make sure that they are included in the ordinance, as well as new state regulations. The state is always updating their regulations, changing regulations, adding new regulations, and you need to be in compliance with what the state requires. And so you want to meet those regulations, as well as just general improvement. The ordinance, can always, and any document can always be improved. And so what we're trying to do in this is, make it a little easier to understand, have it a little more organized, clarify things, fix any, mistakes. And so, that's one of the things and one of the purposes behind updating your zoning and subdivision ordinance. Next slide. In the process so far, we started out by reviewing your existing documents, your existing ordinance, and we drafted some recommended changes to that. The Planning Commission then reviewed those changes and provided us with some input, some edits. We incorporated those edits, and then the Planning Commission went to the public with a public forum for input. After that input, they provided us with some additional edits, and they came from the Historical Review Board. There was also a solar subcommittee that provided some edits to the solar section, as well as the Planning Commission made some recommendations based from that public input. And from there, after incorporating those, we went to the board and to the Planning Commission and had a joint meeting and talked about our steps moving forward, this next phase of this project. So next slide. And the next phase, we're in this first step of that, which is, getting some additional public input. So in January, February timeframe, in January 26, we had stakeholder interviews, and then we are having this virtual forum. That's what we're in right now. There's also a survey out right now. It's been out for about a month. It's going to end this Friday. And so if you were mailed a copy of that, we urge you to fill that out, get that to the county office. You can put it in their Dropbox outside to make sure you meet that Friday deadline. It's also available online on the web, so you can go to the website and take it like that if you'd like. So we just urge everyone to get the word out about the survey. It does close this Friday. And then after that, in April, we're going to meet with the board and the Planning Commission to discuss all of the public input we've received this far. They'll make some decisions about things that they might want to change in the document. And then we'll go into drafting. After drafting, we'll have another joint work session where we'll present that. And then from there, we're going to have a public open house. This is another opportunity for the public to review and provide feedback. We'll take that feedback to the Planning Commission and board during another joint work session, at which time they can make some additional changes, do final revisions. We'll incorporate those. And then in the August-September timeframe, we're looking to have public hearings and possible adoption. One thing I'll point out here is, these dark gray items are specific times that, the public can participate and be very actively involved. And so I want to urge you, though, to stay involved through the whole process. These gray points, these joint work sessions, these are open to the public. So we would, suggest that you stay involved. You can, listen into these work sessions and hear what the discussion is. Next slide. So now moving into a little bit about the ordinance itself. And we're not going to go over every article in detail, and I'm not going to cover every change, but I will highlight some of the major changes. And I just urge everyone to review the draft. It's supplied on the website. I've provided the link for you here at the bottom of the slide. And just generally speaking, we added references to state code. We inserted the most current state code requirements. We clarified language for readability and interpretation. We modernized definitions and uses for easier enforcement and application. And we developed more community design standards. And this included things like signs, regulations, landscaping regulations, and then lighting requirements as well. And I believe there's been a question, I think this came up last time I was doing this presentation, about a red line version of the document. Could we provide a red line version of the document? And the short answer to that is no, we cannot. And that is because it's been through so many rounds of revisions. And then if we compress all that together and add to that the modernization, the rearranging of items, the whole document basically would be red. It would be really hard to track and to follow, what really has changed, because in some instances, the code hasn't changed, the requirement hasn't changed, but we've moved it from, a heavy paragraph of text into a table just to make it a little more easier to read. And so those things would come across looking like, they're new text items, but really it's just a matter of shifting those around. So sorry, but no, we do not have a red line version available. Next slide. Ordinance structure. The biggest changes I want to make note of are we've added articles on landscaping, exterior lighting, also solar facilities, and then we've also moved in the subdivision ordinance into the zoning ordinance. And so those are some of the big items here that are changed, but just in terms of your structure of the ordinance, I'd like to give you sort of a little roadmap of what's here. So if you're not very familiar with an ordinance, or you've got something particular in mind that you would like to look up, maybe this can help direct you to where to go for that. So Articles 1 through 5 contain a lot of state requirements about the purpose of the ordinance. It contains kind of the rules for how a planning commission operates. It also talks about if you're seeking a permit, what things you need to provide. It also contains an extensive list of definitions. So if you're going through the ordinance and there's terms that you don't know or you don't understand, you can go to the definitions to find clarity for that. Article 6 outlines the zoning districts. And so remember, we took a look at that map. And so this is those, AC, the RR, the B, all of those are provided in this article. The standards are there for each of those districts, things like lot size, setback requirement, road frontage requirement, all of those sorts of things are included in this article. Articles 7, 8, and 9 are all about uses. It provides a list of what uses are allowed in each district and any specific restrictions for the uses. Articles 10, 11, 12, and 13 are community design standards. These are aimed to maintain or improve the beauty of the community. Again, there's a lot of new material in these sections. Article 14 is planned unit development. This is for it's actually a zoning district for mixed uses, meaning it can have both business and residential uses. There's no land in the county currently zoned planned unit development or PUD, but this enables or allows someone to apply for something like this. Article 15 and 16 are some specific uses that just required a little more detail, and so they've been pulled out into their own article. Article 17 includes your site plan requirements, how the process works when site plans are reviewed and that sort of thing. Article 18 is your subdivision ordinance that we've pulled in, and this includes the regulations for dividing property. And then Article 19 is your flooding and floodplains. If you're building in a floodplain, what requirements there are and that sort of thing. So next slide. I'll take a sip of water real quick. So Article 2 is the definitions. The existing definitions contained a lot of requirements and standards, and so we remove those out of the definitions and put them kind of where they belonged in the ordinances or in the ordinance. Then there were some new terms added. So when we brought in the subdivision ordinance and cluster ordinance, we needed to add those definitions. Sign definitions and wireless telecommunication definitions. These have either been modified or in some cases some are added, and that's because of a court case and because of some state regulation about these that we wanted to make sure are covered. Then in terms of new uses have been added. We've introduced some broad terms to help reduce the need for zoning amendments and just to kind of be more business friendly. And so an example of this is commercial indoor amusement is one of the general terms that we added. It covers things like pool halls and video arcades. The personal services you see there, that covers things like barbershops, pet grooming, florists, laundromats. And so we've been able to reduce the list down by using these broad terms, and we wanted to make sure the definitions are very clear that it covers these broader uses. Restaurant mobile, that's one of those new uses that was a need in the community. And so, restaurant mobile, that would be what you might consider a food truck. And so we defined that. And so this is not a inclusive list. There are definitely more things and more definitions that were added, but just some examples for you for tonight. Next slide. Article 3, general conditions. Not a lot changed here. There were some things, about parking and that sort of thing. We've moved those out into the appropriate parking article, as well as just updating for best practices, making sure it matched state code, that sort of thing. The administration article is that article that includes the planning commission role, as well as the board of zoning appeals role. It also talks about, your permits and applications, or what happens if there's a violation, what type of penalties there are. So we just made sure that that matched the state code. We had all the proper references to state code in this section. And then we're enabling a new item, which says that you can have civil fines. And we do see that as a best practice for penalties against this ordinance. And so we've included that in this section as well. Next slide. So Article 5, conditional zoning. This article allows applicants, as part of a rezoning request, to proffer items. The community may not want to accept cash proffers, and so we added language, though, that the county cannot demand or accept unreasonable proffers, but they can accept some community amenities or design features. So for an example, the applicant could request rezoning for a multifamily development, and the county can accept a proffer of designing the building with a specific look and a playground on the property for community use. So we put these things in, just making sure it matches state code, but also enabling the county to accept these things. Next slide. So the next article is your zoning districts. And I'm going to mention that map again where we talked about those districts, the AC, the R districts, the B, the industrial. There's also some special districts, the PUD that I mentioned. There's no current zone property as PUD. There's also the historic preservation, transportation corridor overlay, and Chesapeake Bay protection area. And so this article really gets into the details of what is required, what's allowed in these districts. It covers the intent of the districts, and then there's also a table of dimensional standards is what we call it. And this outlines those rules on lot size, on the road frontage, on the setbacks for each of the districts. So this is where you'd want to go once you identify what your property is zoned. You could go to this district and see, okay, how much road frontage is required, or how much setback if I'm going to build a home, and that sort of thing. And we'll take a look at that table now on the next slide. So this is the district dimensional standards table. And a couple of things to note. Most of the requirements here have not changed. So this was one of those items that was a lot of text, and we've just broken it into a table just to make it a little easier to digest and find what you're looking for. The changes are highlighted in yellow. So anything in yellow, those are things that are proposed as changes. And you'll notice to the left are some notes that go with this table. And one of those is highlighted as well. That's the smaller lots for family divisions are being reduced to 3 acres. Also changes in yellow in the table include in the AC district, the setbacks are increased as well as the acreage. And the Planning Commission suggested this as a way to help protect the rural nature and preserve open space. And so for those with land that's less than 10 acres, don't be concerned. Your parcels still can be used as non-conforming lots. You're probably more familiar with this term being grandfathered. So meaning if you have property that's less than this 10 acres, you would be grandfathered. You could put a home on the property as long as you meet the other requirements for setbacks and those types of things. And just to orient ourselves a little bit with this table, you'll see going across the top are the districts, the AC, the RR, the R1, and so forth. And so you find the district that you are interested in, and then you can follow that column down and see what the minimum lot size is, the minimum lot depth, the minimum frontage requirements, setback requirements, and so on. And so just looking at that first light blue column, the AC district, you'll see there that the minimum lot area is 10 acres. And then there's an A there in parentheses next to it. And that's referring to the notes. And so it refers you over to the notes that say the minimum lot area for a family subdivision shall be 3 acres. And this just means that if you're cutting a piece of property off for a family member, an immediate family member, then you don't have to abide by this 10-acre rule. You can have a lot as small as 3 acres. If you're dividing it off for someone else that's not an immediate family member, you're just going to sell this piece of property, then you do have to abide by the 10-acre rule. And this was something that was voiced as a concern during the last public input. It is on the survey as a question, but I'd like to pose it tonight as well in a poll just to see what this group is thinking about this. And so if we can get that poll up. And it's just asking if you feel like the lot size should be increased from 5 acres to 10 acres. And just again, reminding you, this does not apply to giving a gift to a family member. That could be 3 acres, as well as it doesn't change if your lot is smaller than that. You can still use your property if you can meet the other requirements. So I'll give a few more moments just for people to continue putting in your answers if you feel like this size is appropriate for the 10 acres. How are we doing on voting, Travis?
We are at 55%. 19 of 34 have voted. There's still a few coming in.
All right, let's give it a few more seconds. Let everyone get their vote in that wants to vote. More votes coming in, or has it stopped?
We had a few more come in, but it seems to have stopped. We're at 60%.
All right, let's take a look at the results. So we've got 67% of those voted said no, they did not feel this was an appropriate change. So thank you for voting on that. I will remind you it is in the survey as well. And also in the survey are the other items in yellow are also there in the survey for you to consider and provide feedback on. So we can close the poll. Thank you. And go to next slide. And so this is your use matrix, and this table is already in your ordinance. What we did with this table was to clean it up a bit. There were quite a few definitions and standards. We've taken those out. We've incorporated those broad terms that I was talking about, such as the personal services and that sort of thing, and then put in those new uses like the food truck, short-term rental. That's the term that we're using for Airbnb and other businesses similar to that. the way that you use this table, you can do it in two ways. And so you can start by, if you've got a particular use that you're interested in. So for example, let's say, you want to start a commercial greenhouse. So you can follow this list down till you see greenhouse commercial, and then you follow that row over, and you'll see in the first block there under the AC district, it says R, and that means it's permitted by right. And then the next two blocks are empty. And so that's the residential districts, which means it's not allowed in those. And then in the B districts, you'll see C, which means that it requires a conditional use permit. And then in the I district, it is by right. The other way to use it is if you've got a particular district, you just want to know, okay, what's everything that could be in this district? You could start up at the top, look at that district, follow that column down, and see all of the uses that would be allowed by right or allowed conditionally, and the uses that are not allowed at all. So that's the way that you would use your use matrix. Next slide. So just because a use is in the matrix as by right doesn't mean that's the end of the story. So some of those uses still have additional standards that have to be complied with. And so those standards might be things like getting a business license, or being a certain distance from a residential district, or maybe it requires a fence or things like that. All of the conditions for the uses are geared toward making sure the county is aware of the use and making sure the use is a good neighbor. And so on this slide, I do have some examples of uses that do have standards associated with them. There are, more than these, and I would just urge you to take a look at this article and see the standards associated with all of the uses there. Next slide. Non-conforming uses and lots. And so this is that thing that I mentioned earlier, and I said, you're probably more familiar with it being called grandfathered. And what this means is if you have a lot or a use that's in existence prior to the adoption of, some new rule, then you are grandfathered. You don't have to change what you're doing. So there are some nuances to this. You cannot enlarge or extend or structurally alter your use. So for example, if you've got a home and you are closer in your front setback, you don't meet the new front setback requirement. You don't have to tear your front porch off. It can stay, but you wouldn't be able to extend out further into that front setback. So if you wanted to add on to your home, you might have to do that to the rear of the property, as long as you can meet your rear setbacks or your side setbacks and those types of things. Ownership does not affect the status. So, if you have a business, you sell it to someone else, they can continue that business, even if it's not listed as a business that is allowed in that district. If it's already in place, it can continue. What changes this is if it's discontinued for more than 2 years. So if you sell that business to someone, and they stop operating for whatever reason, and it stops for more than 2 years, then that non-conforming status is lost. It's no longer grandfathered. This section, this article, is very heavily based on state code. State code, sets that 2-year limit and that sort of thing. So there's not a lot of changes that we did here. We mostly just tried to clarify the language, make it clear. And then there were some items that had been spread through the ordinance, and we just collected it all into this article where it should be. Next slide. The next set of articles could be considered as community design regulations. And this is including your signs, your landscaping, your lighting, parking, all the things that contribute to your community character. And so when you're considering these items, you should think about, what travelers see as they travel your roads. What is the feeling that they have as they're going through the primary routes of King William? And so we explore this in the survey. I'm not going to poll you on it tonight, but I am going to just kind of go through what's in some of these sections. So next slide. So Article 10 is signs, and sign regulations have taken a different form because of a Supreme Court case between a Mr. Reed and a town of Gilbert. And the court case made it illegal to regulate signs based on what they say and their purpose or the use that they're advertising. So if you have to read the sign to apply the regulation, then it's not a lawful regulation. You can regulate signs based on their type, their style, based on what district they're in. And so that's what we've done in the ordinance. We've categorized signs into categories like temporary, freestanding, wall sign, and then we've also regulated them based on what district they're in. Next slide. One of the sign types that I mentioned was temporary signs. And so this is an example of that. You see here, what we think of, typically as three very different signs. One is a political sign. In the middle, you've got a real estate sign. And then to the right is a personal message. These in our minds, can be pretty different. But as far as the regulation goes, they have to be treated equally. And so that means the size of these signs have to be regulated the same, or the number of these signs that can be on a piece of property have to be regulated the same. So these are all temporary signs when you see that referred to in the ordinance. Next slide. Freestanding sign is another category of signs. Here you can see that these can take on lots of different shapes. So they're all called freestanding signs, but to the left, one might be a monument style. In the middle, you see a pole sign. These can, have quite a bit more height to them. And then to the right is a post sign. So these have to be treated equally in terms of size and height and all of those things. Next slide. And so we do regulate the number, the size, the height of the sign, and we do that based on the district. So we've got two tables here. The maximum dimensions are in these tables, and you can see we've split it up into the business zones have specific regulations as far as how many, the size, and the height. And then there are different regulations for the AC, the R districts. These regulations have been reviewed by the Planning Commission, and they adjusted these numbers to try to be consistent with what the current signage is in King William. Next slide. The landscaping section. This is a new section. Previously, the ordinance kind of referred to landscaping plans, but it didn't give a lot of direction. And so what we've done is just tried to provide some basic minimum guidelines for the community. These regulations are going to apply to rezoning and conditional use applications. It requires buffers between business, industrial, multifamily developments. If those items back up to an ag or residential property, there is a buffer requirement provided. It requires screening of dumpsters and mechanical equipment. Fence height is restricted to 7 feet in residential districts and 8 feet in business districts. And then parking lots with 30 or more spaces must provide at least 1 tree for every 12 spaces. So these are, some of the basic things that we put into the landscaping requirements. And this is supplied for feedback in the survey as well. Next slide. Exterior lighting. And so here we consolidated items that were kind of spread throughout the ordinance. We've provided some detailed language and an illustration for full cutoff lighting. All of the standards here are going to apply to business and industrial districts, as well as businesses that are located within another district. So if there is a business within a residential district or in an ag district, it does have to comply with the lighting requirements here. There are exemptions for security lighting, for lighting the American flag, for holiday lighting, and some other exemptions as well. There are limits to the height of the lighting. In the general business district, it's 20 feet, and then the industrial, it's 30 feet. And these are just to kind of prevent light trespass, help maintain dark skies, and that sort of thing. So that's the objective behind the lighting requirements. Next slide. So the next article is off-street parking and loading, and this tells you about your parking requirements, specifically in terms of each use. And so there's also design requirements for parking lots. We have reduced the parking requirements by allowing parking lots to be used by multiple uses. And then our design requirements, we've said that if a parking lot has 10 or more spaces, it has to provide painted lines or other means to indicate individual spaces. So just some general parking requirements there. Next slide. This is the PUD, the Plan Unit Development. Again, this is a zoning district that you don't currently have any land zoned for this, but if someone wanted to apply for this type of development, we've just tried to make sure that we've updated the application requirements. We've added some detail about standards for landscaping, lighting, architectural design, just to make sure that if an application comes in, you do get a nice development. The next article, telecommunications, covers cellular towers. The changes here are to bring the section into compliance with state code. State has had some requirements about small cell facilities, as well as saying that the county is limited on the fees they can charge, as well as reasons for disapproval. And so all of those things have been incorporated to make sure it's in compliance with state code. Solar facilities. This is a new section. This section works to ensure appropriate setbacks from other uses, to make sure there's neighborhood input, also to make sure that there is, the county can take advantage of some revenue opportunities. There's also consideration of the environment, and then proper dismantling at the end of the life of the project. This section has been updated by a subcommittee, as well as we are recommending a couple of changes as well, just to capture those county revenue options. Those are new things that came about through state legislation. And so those are recommended in this article. Next slide. So site plans. One of the comments heard during the first public input session was a concern for requiring site plans when people want to rezone their property. The county requires that when someone wants to rezone, say they have something that is, their land is agriculture and they want to rezone it to business or to residential, the county requires that they provide a site plan. And I've provided an example here to the left of the screen. This gives the county greater confidence that rezoning is appropriate and that what locates on the property will be appropriate and fit nicely in the community. However, from a landowner perspective, it's a little difficult to market a piece of property unless it's already been zoned to business or to residential. And so that's what we're hearing from landowners, is that they would like to be able to rezone property without requiring the site plan. And so that's something that you need to consider. It is a question in the survey. I'm not going to pull you on it tonight, but, just something to consider is, is it okay to have kind of a general idea, that this property is going to be rezoned to business, and so the uses within the business district would be allowed, that might be retail store, restaurant, personal service, those types of things. Or do you need to know more? Do you need to know kind of the design and the layout on the lot prior to the rezoning? So that's something to consider, and please get the survey in with your thoughts on that. Next slide. The subdivision section regulates the division of land, providing specific requirements depending on the number of lots you're creating. And some of the changes in this section, beyond just moving it completely into the zoning ordinance, was putting in some state code references and compliance items. We also added in the cluster subdivisions. There was elimination of flag lots and minor subdivisions. Earlier on in drafting, there was a change about family division, but after the last public input, the Planning Commission decided to maintain the time requirement as it's listed in your current ordinance. And so the way that it's in the current ordinance and the way that it is in this draft now is to say that if you own a piece of property and you want to give it to your child or your grandchild, some immediate family member, you have to own it for at least 5 years before you can cut off a portion to give to, that family member. That family member then needs to own the property for 3 years before they can sell the property. So they can, own the property, they can build on the property, use the property, but they can't sell it for at least 3 years. And the reason behind that is to prevent circumventing some of these other rules that are in the subdivision ordinance. So, kind of as a family, you get a break from some of the requirements, and to prevent people, just claiming family or, trying to use that to get around the requirements. That's the reason behind the time frame here. And we do have a poll about this question, or a poll about this topic. So we'll get that up now. And it's, are these time requirements for family subdivisions appropriate to prevent circumventing the ordinance? And so, yes, you think it's appropriate. Maybe you think the time requirements are too long. Maybe they're too short, they're not long enough, or maybe you don't have an opinion on this question. And so I'll give you some time to consider and to vote on this item. All right, how is voting looking, Travis?
We are 45%. They're still coming in.
All right. Please let us know your thoughts on this. Give you just a couple more seconds to cast your vote.
Still having a few pop in. It looks like we're done. I will share the results.
All right, let's see the results. So we've got most people in this group feeling that it's appropriate. Close behind that, though, is that it's too long, and a few feel that it's too short. So thank you for voting on this. Again, it is in the survey, so you can respond there as well if you haven't already. So thank you for that, and we'll move on to the last article to talk about. So the last article, Article 19, is floods. And fortunately, these images are not King William. And this article regulates structures in floodplains and works to prevent things like this from happening. So that's the purpose of this article. It's really a lot based on state code. It was updated recently, and so we didn't do a lot to this section. There were just some references and things like that that we updated, but not a lot of changes here because it had been changed relatively recently. Next slide. So next steps are the survey. I've mentioned it. I've put in lots of plugs for it tonight. So if you haven't done it already, please get your survey in. It is due this Friday. You can drop it off if you are, participating by paper copy. You can drop it off at the county office. They have a mailbox outside where you can put that in to make sure it's there by Friday. It is also online on the website. You can go and take it that way. It does close Friday night. So please participate in the survey. After that, on April 12th, we will have a joint work session with the board and the Planning Commission to talk about the survey results, to talk about what we heard from the stakeholders. And then from there, we will incorporate any edits that the board and Planning Commission would like us to do. We'll then come back to the public for a public open house, likely in May or June, and then have another work session where we talk about what we've heard at the public open house, and then we'll do some final editing and likely have public hearings in August, September, and potential adoption. So stay tuned for all of those items. Next slide. And I do have one more plug for the survey. Sorry, I thought that might have been the last one, but one more plug for the survey. Here is the link to do that online. And again, it's this Friday that it closes. And next slide is time now for some question and answer. If you would like to look at the ordinance draft, it is linked here for you, as well as this is where you can get to that survey. Again, I'll say it one more time, but we've got, I would say, 10 or 15 minutes to go through some questions. I saw some questions coming through chat, and so we will start addressing those and see how far we can get tonight.
Rebecca, would you like me to read the questions and the initial response that was provided in the chat for any additional?
Sure, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So the first question that we had was about the stakeholders that were interviewed. We did interview 11 individuals that fell into one of 4 groups with direct experience with the ordinance, and those were farmers and landowners, tourism and economic development professionals, folks like realtors, development finance professionals, and attorneys, as well as surveyors, contractors, and engineers. And Rebecca, do you have anything to kind of add related to that?
No, I would say, the interesting thing about the stakeholder groups is even though they are, representing a wide array of people from the community, there were some, themes that came out and surfaced to the top among all the groups. And we will be bringing that to the joint work session for the Board and Planning Commission to hear.
And I'll just add on to that we will also be posting that full survey and stakeholder summary as well on the website for folks that want to read into that in more detail. The next question that we had was from Steve Brown. He asked, being that the demographics are changing in the county, what is meant by maintaining the rural character of the county? And certainly we recognize that this is a subjective characteristic and that it means something different to everyone. I think generally folks have interpreted this as large lot, still having some agriculture, things like forest versus heavy commercial uses, things like that. Rebecca, do you have anything else to add on that?
No, I think that covered that.
I do have someone who has raised their hand that is called in. If I can unmute them to ask their question.
Sure.
Unmute. It's coming.
Okay. My name is Angela Vessels. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Angela.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Angela Vessels and I live on Upshaw Road. I'm a homeowner, I'm a property owner and a taxpayer. My father has been a homeowner, property owner and taxpayer for since 1950, a long time. My parents, my family actually has owned property in Aylett since 1895. So we've been around for a long time. So my question is, how does grandfathering in and the ordinance, how does the ordinance affect me being grandfathered in or my family being grandfathered in? I understand that you talk about 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, excuse me, 3 acres, 5 acres and 10 acres of land. So how does that impact being grandfathered in?
So your property, you would be grandfathered in terms of whatever your lot size is today. If it's less than the 10 acres, that's still usable property if you can meet the setback requirements and those types of things. So if you want to build a home or, put something on the property, you can do that. So that's how the grandfathering works. If you go to change the property and divide the property to give to, a child or something like that, then you would need, you would divide off a minimum of 3 acres to give to the child.
So it is a minimum of 3 acres and not 5 or 10
Correct.
that you can gift. Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
We had some additional questions, Rebecca, related to lot size. So I'd like us to go back to the district dimensional standards slide. I believe that was slide 15, and really take some time to just point out a few specific questions that we had. The first question was, and I'll read it out loud. It was a question from Mill that said, can requirements for the size of homes apply to a 5-acre lot size as well as a 10-acre lot size? They were interpreting this chart that we had a requirement for the square footage size of homes. And I believe what we're looking at here is actually the minimum lot area is shown here, and things like minimum lot depth and setback. So I'm not seeing here exactly what is this question is referring to, but Rebecca was hoping that you could revisit this slide and maybe explain exactly what we're talking about here. Are you there, Rebecca?
Yes, so the sizes here are not applying to living space. So when we're talking about a minimum lot area, that is for kind of your whole yard space. In some instances, I think, when you're talking about size of the home, in some cases, some subdivisions, developments and those types of things will have covenants and restrictions that require a certain size home be in that subdivision. but that is not the case in the zoning ordinance. So this is regulating the size of the lot, and then the size of the home can be somewhat changed if you've got a smaller lot that is grandfathered, and you have to meet setback requirements. You may not be able to build a mansion on the smaller lot. You may have to either go up in height and stories, or build that smaller home so that you can meet the setback requirements. So I hope that I have answered that question.
And similarly on this slide, Steve Brown asked if we are saying that the front setback is almost 1.5 times the size of a football field, I think is the question. And I think that one of the things that's highlighted on here is what is being proposed, at least from the primary road, is 100 feet from a primary road, and then it reduces down from that. And I believe that a football field is more like 300 feet. So it wouldn't be 1.5 times a football field. If you're thinking about how that size compares, it'd be more like 1/3 of a football field. And if there's any follow-up questions to either of those from Steve or Mill, feel free to.
And I will just speak to also the minimum lot frontage. Sometimes, people don't always know what that means or what that's referring to. The minimum lot frontage is saying that, at the road, the front of the lot, the width there has to be 500 feet, which is proposed for the AC district. And the reason that these were proposed to be increased was to kind of match this 10-acre size, to pull things away from the road, to kind of add wider spaces, to kind of open up the community and not have close clustered housing in this AC district. So that was the thinking with the Planning Commission on these items.
Great. Again, we'll look for any follow-ups if there's additional questions there. The next question was from Barbie, and I think I'm going to have to go back to the zoning ordinance and look, unless Rebecca, you know offhand. She asked if a by right event venue has to have a permit. If the use is by right, then they would still need a zoning permit and a business license to operate as a use and as a business in the county. But it would not require a special use permit.
Right, and the way that this has been drafted right now, and this is a new proposal, one of the newer proposals, is that the event, once it's kind of over a certain size or doesn't meet some of the requirements that we have listed, then it does fall into the category of requiring a conditional use permit. And so what we've got it right now is, if you're planning on having events more than 150 people, then you would, yes, go to the Planning Commission and the board and ask for a conditional use permit. And there are some other conditions there as well that you would need to meet.
And we also had a question from Chris that asked for an explanation of how the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance are related.
So your comprehensive plan is your guiding document. It guides, it kind of provides that vision that the community feels that they want to achieve with their community, and where they kind of want to be in the next 20 years or so. So that's your comprehensive plan. And then the zoning ordinance works to achieve that vision. So if your comprehensive plan is talking about, preserving wide open spaces, then you would see things in your zoning ordinance for the larger lot sizes and things like that to help achieve that vision.
Yes, so they are related and they certainly should work together. And oftentimes in developing the comprehensive plan, there will be strategies to update the zoning ordinance in order to reinforce the comprehensive plan and the community's goals. The county is in the process of updating their comprehensive plan. However, this process, the zoning ordinance update, has been ongoing well before that project has kicked off. All right, looks like we have, I believe, addressed all of the questions in the chat. If there are any others, feel free to continue to send them over the next few minutes, and we'll kind of take the opportunity to turn back to the phone. Travis, do you want to provide the directions for folks that want to raise their hand to ask any questions on the phone?
Sure. If you're on a phone and would like to reach out, raise your hand to ask a question, please dial *9. And that will raise your hand. Also, Kelly, I just copied another question from Jennifer. She actually sent it directly to me. So I just put that in the chat if you could address that one. Currently, we do not have anyone that has raised their hand.
Great. Okay, thank you. I do see the question, Travis, that you provided, and it says, if you want to buy land in King William in the future to build a house, does the 10-acre lot mean that you would have to buy at least 10 acres of land? No, it does not. I'm sure there are parcels existing that are less than that. And so that would fall into that non-conforming or grandfathered category. You could purchase that property. You can build on that property. Again, you would need to meet setback requirements, have well and septic installed on the property and those types of things. But you do not have to buy the 10 acres.
And just reinforcing Rebecca's point, that 10 acres would be for the agricultural conservation zoning district. So there are also 2 other zoning districts where residential development would be permitted. That's the RR district and the R1 zoning district. And both of those have much smaller lot sizes proposed. And so there may be existing parcels, although much of the county is zoned AC, that agricultural zoning district. It would certainly be conceivable that subdivisions may be rezoned and developers may come in and develop some additional residential properties at that smaller lot size. And then that's really kind of going back to Chris's question, where the comprehensive plan comes in, because through that rezoning process, the county, the planning commission, and the board of supervisors would be looking at the comprehensive plan to determine whether that was consistent with the community's vision. Looks like there is still some confusion on the 100-foot setback related to subdivision.
So it says, I was speaking to the minimum lot frontage relating to the 10 acres. And so the minimum lot frontage, if you're you're fronting a primary road, then the width at the road, so kind of from one side of your property to the other side of the property, right there along the road, would be 500 feet. That is what is proposed. And that's if you're on a primary road. If it's a secondary road, it's 300 feet. Fronting on a subdivision street, it's 150 feet. And I believe I've answered that now, so you're welcome.
And it looks like we have another question that asks, Bruce Johnson asked, to what extent are private property rights considered in the ordinances and zoning? And I'll begin by just saying that this Commonwealth of Virginia is very considerate of private property rights in what is allowed under state code for localities to regulate through zoning. And so everything that we propose is and must be in alignment with what is permitted under the Commonwealth of Virginia. The Berkeley Group, generally, when we're developing ordinances, we really try to respect personal property rights, private property rights, while also balancing the community interests as expressed through public outreach, through the comprehensive plan and things like that. So certainly there's a balance between regulation and private property rights and community interests that we work very closely and make sure that we align with state code in order to achieve that. Rebecca, anything else to add there?
No, I think that my thoughts as well. Do we have any other questions? It's been a little over an hour. I see someone I think has raised their hand on the phone. So let's see if we can unmute them and answer their question.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, hello, my name is Daryl Kellum. My question is, it was my understanding when this all started that the Berkeley Group was hired kind of to be a neutral, unbiased third party and come in and make recommendations based on the size of our county and the current infrastructure, make recommendations on where we would try to proceed from there. But I'm hearing a lot of feedback of, you know, the Planning Commission wants this and the Planning Commission wants that. If you guys are just going to do what the Planning Commission asked you to do, what was the purpose of hiring you guys to come in?
And so we do, you know, in our initial drafting, we did take a look at the county ordinances, take a look at other communities that are similar to your community, and we proposed that to the Planning Commission. Ultimately, though, this is the county's decision. So the Planning Commission, you know, does know the community better than I don't live there, certainly. I am, you know, looking from the outside perspective, and I can provide that. But it is the county's ordinance. And so the Planning Commission reviews it. They pass it to the Board of Supervisors, who will also review and can make changes. You know, and those changes a lot of times are based on community input. And then from there, it gets adopted. So, you know, we are consultants. We, you know, don't write anything in stone, though. We are, you know, simply providing some input.
Can I ask
Kelly,
a follow?
do you have anything to add?
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Sure.
I see here we're reviewing all the zoning ordinances and land uses, but one big topic in King William is land use. How come that was left off the survey?
Land use is not a zoning ordinance topic. That is a tax incentive. And so that's something that's a separate process that has to go through your Board of Supervisors for consideration, but is not part of your zoning ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Looks like we have another question from Mr. Fred Brown. Are the ordinances intended to limit starter homes? Rebecca, would you like to take that one?
Sure, the ordinance is definitely not intended to limit any type of homes. The ordinance tries to direct development and what we're actually seeing in a lot of communities is a need for a wider variety of housing, so that it does include, low income or starter homes and, senior living and those types of things. And so we do try to actually address those and open those things up and direct them to appropriate places in the county.
And we have another question from Barbie asking, how or why is a bed and breakfast different from a short-term rental?
And so a bed and breakfast, typically, the owners are there at the property, they are providing a meal. What we see with short-term rentals is that sometimes the owner does not live there at all. It is people, coming to the community and staying there, renting the property for a short time, whether it's a couple of days or a week. And so that we feel is different and warrants a different definition and different requirements. Any other questions? We have just a few minutes. I don't want to keep folks too long, but if you've got questions, we're happy to answer them.
We have another hand that has been raised.
All right, so yeah, you can unmute them and let's have their question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes,
I'm sorry? You
yes,
can
go
hear?
ahead.
Okay, my question is, currently, according to Richmond MLS, the median sale price house in King William is around $275,000. And the major subdivisions we have, typically they're 275 plus. If the acreage goes higher from 5 to 10 acres, what areas would that allow in the county for the middle to lower income people?
So really, so I'll jump in first and
Go
then
ahead,
Rebecca. Both of us, I think we're waiting for the other to start. So really, whether it's 5 acres or 10 acres, the smaller lot homes are going to be within your R1 zoning district. And that is going to be a 15,000 square foot house, or I'm sorry, excuse me, 15,000 square foot lot, 20,000 square foot with public water, 30,000 square feet with just water. And so there's some variation there depending upon what kind of utilities are available. And so those are going to be the zoning districts that are going to be the smaller lot zoning districts. Certainly increasing lot size will likely have an impact on the cost of property in your AC district. You'll likely end up with non-conforming lots. We had a question on that earlier that would still be able to be sold and used for residential use within the other given zoning requirements. However, certainly increasing that minimum lot size, that really comes down to some of that balance that you look at when you're thinking about the comprehensive plan and some of those tough decisions that have to be made when you're considering that balance between housing goals and your community character goals.
Thank you, Kelly. You took my words almost exactly. I also see a question that was in the chat directed to me. It says, if you have 2 acres, can you build on it or go before the board? Yes, I'm assuming you're asking this in the AC district. If you've got 2 acres, yes, you can build on it. You need to meet setback requirements and any health department requirements for well and septic and that sort of thing. As long as you can meet those requirements, you can put your home on it without having to go before the board or anything like that. It would just be going to the zoning office and building permits and that sort of thing.
We also had a question that if you gift 5 lots within your family, does that constitute a subdivision? Rebecca, I'll let you take that one.
And so it does not, if those 5 lots are going to immediate family members and are going 1 lot per family member. So if you have 5 children, you're dividing, your piece of property to give, each child a lot. That is considered a family subdivision, and not a minor or major subdivision within the ordinance. So any final thoughts, final questions before we close out for the night? Just while we're waiting for those to come in, I'll remind you to please take the survey. You do have until Friday to get those in. You can do that on the county website, or with the paper survey, you can drop that off at the county building. I do see a phone line with a hand raised, and we'll take your question if you can unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
One final question concerning the commercial side of this discussion. It's a big controversy here about the site plan, whether it should be required or not. One of the problems we have here in King William is we have less than a handful of properties already zoned and ready to go. So when prospective clients come here, the process to rezone is so lengthy and cumbersome, they lose interest and go elsewhere. Do you see any value to having some properties in a specific area rezoned and ready to go? And it's impossible to provide a site plan if you don't know what's coming there.
Yeah, so many communities do find it beneficial to, designate some areas, and that's something that can come through your comprehensive plan as well. So as you're, looking at the community and deciding what areas are appropriate for, commercial or residential, those things can be goals and strategies within your comprehensive plan. To say, yes, we want to go ahead and rezone some areas for commercial or for residential. And that's something that, the community can do and take and be proactive in doing. I also see a question, how was this forum advertised? And so there was a flyer that the county sent out with the survey and information on it for the forum. The first forum, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, was at the end of January and had to be ended and then rescheduled for tonight. And I believe tonight's forum was put in the newspaper and on the website. Sherry or Travis, if you have additional information to provide there, then, please feel free to add anything there that you know about the advertising for tonight.
Okay, we did advertise it in the Tidewater Review and the Country Courier the past 2 weeks prior to the meeting. We've had it on the website, and we have mentioned this meeting at the last couple of Planning Commission meetings and board meetings.
Thank you, Sherry. And so I don't see any more questions, but I do want to thank you all for your time and your participation. You've been a great crowd and asked good questions. So just thank you for that. Again, get that survey in and stay tuned. The next meeting with the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors on this topic will be April 12th. So I hope you can tune in to that as well. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.